So now that I've gone over what makes a map perfect, what makes one horrible, and what makes one just completely average, what kind of qualities make a map just below average? Not necessarily to the point of being a bad map, but to the point of generally not wanting to vote for them if they come up on a selection. Well, looking at the list and how it ranked up, the obvious trait that they all hold the same is that they don't have a consistent mid-round flow. On some maps, they'll have an intense initial fight for power weapons and positioning, but for the most part, all these maps have the issue where you can go from the 60th second in a round to the 4-minute and 30-second in a round, and you haven't seen a single thing happen on the kill ticker. It's caused by most areas being controlled by one choke point, which I'm sure if you've watched the other videos in the series you're familiar with by now. Take Hail as an example. 3 ways to the middle of the map, all 3 being narrow choke points that can easily be watched by one player at each one. Combine it with the fact that power weapons tend to be located in the center of the map, and you have one team basically able to just get every power weapon if the initial rush of the map winds up not completely determining the round. On a more easily understandable level though, I found it odd that a lot of these maps had side imbalances. What's even more odd is that 3 of these maps in this tier found their way into Gears 2's MLG map set, which just kind of shows off how much worse the maps were in that game. But enough of that. If I start bashing Gears 2, I might never stop. Avalanche and Pavilion share pretty much the same qualities as far as what makes them inferior maps. They both have imbalanced spawns where one team gets to the middle much faster than the other, which is especially annoying due to how wide open the midsection of the map are, making them so much more reliant on when you're able to get to the center of the map. They also share equally terrible weapon choices. Avalanche does get the awesome aspect of having the battlefield change mid-round, which forces action. Never a bad thing, and definitely the reason it's at the top of the list in this tier. My main issue with Pavilion is the fact that it's only got 2 choke points. If the Cage at Mortar just opened up for both teams, it could be a pretty good map, but not only did we never get that, we couldn't even get topside doors at spawn to be open all the time. They got both of those right in Wingman. I'm never going to understand how they got both of those right in Wingman, and then never thought, this is a great idea, we should put this in regular multiplayer. I mean, it's honestly, it's like they made a really good map, and then they retracted all possibility of it last second, and then they threw the worst possible weapons they could have ever done on that map. It's always baffled me how bad Pavilion is considering how good it could have been. River, on the other hand, also shares the issue of a side imbalance, although less severe considering the weapon placed where the center matters most means absolutely fuck all, and the 2 towers are a race to the sniper, making them as crossing angles near worthless. There's just way too much going on for a map as concentrated and small as River. 2 frags, 2 snipe, 2 torques, a mortar, a boom shot, and 2 boltox for a map that literally has 2 choke points and 7 crossing angles on each one from each side. That's unacceptable. The map is just a clusterfuck of bad decisions on map design. It plays surprisingly well in spite of that fact, but I think that has to do a lot more with there being so many bullshit explosives available at any time that it just kind of forces people to die. The only way I can see the map even being made better would be if they opened up a ramp by the spawns into the river and took off about half the weapon spawns. At least it would turn the map from an explosive clusterfuck to a crossing clusterfuck, which plays into the whole map control, power weapons, teamwork, triangle kind of thing a lot better than the 19 explosions a second kind of gameplay does. On the unfixably not good scale, we've got Tyro Station twice, which is pretty much equally bad in the 2 games that it's in. It's pretty much the birthplace of the 2 choke point movement that every map felt the need to follow in Gears 2, and while putting 2 torque bows on the map made it unique in Gears 1, it also helped turn it into a boring piece of shit camp fest where people were, whenever people were actually playing to win. Seriously, this map was second only to Rooftops in unbearableness to play for game battles matches. I shit you not, matches were decided by who had the best player at lobbing and ricocheting torque bow shots. Before Critical made those godly montages where he was getting, double ricochets and bouncing shots off ceilings, 30-minute matches were being decided by that shit. It's not half as fun as it sounds. The map does get some points for being unique with the suicide train aspect, and it was acceptable if teams were playing aggressively, but there just wasn't much of an incentive to do so. So, I mean, truthfully, I probably should have even put it lower than I did. It just occasionally can play better than where it's, better than the other maps below it, which is kind of sad. On the Gears 3 scale, we've got 2 maps that, in my opinion, showcase exactly where Gears 3 went wrong with weapon balancing. The initial fight for the center of the map is pretty awesome on both Drydock and Thrashball, but what you get left with afterwards is just horrendous gameplay. Once one team's able to control the center, the round may as well just end in any game type that isn't King of the Hill. Map control is so gargantuanly important in Gears 3 that any attempt to take over concession stands on Thrashball or retake the midsection from either side on Dry Dock are completely useless against any form of organized opponents. Not even just the really good type of players, even average players can just hold high ground until they get enough of an angle to take out the other team, or just flat out like bore them to death. I can't count how many times I've sat on Dry Dock by one of the bolt hawks and just waited for somebody to do something stupid. And of course people aren't stupid enough to do something stupid all the time, so I'll bore myself to death and I'll lose on purpose sometimes when it gets that bad. You know the mid-round gameplay sucks when you have a better chance at retaking the center of the map just trying to cross-map bolt hawk people than you do with mini-nuke frags, inks, and teamwork. It's a shame, too, because the initial rush at the start of the round on both of those maps is so great. They both even work with smokes being part of it, which is unheard of between Gears 2 and 3. The only reason Gears 3 Bullet Marsh is a tier above the Gears 1 Bullet Marsh version, by the way, is because the side imbalance just doesn't mean as much. In fact, I'm pretty sure they actually evened it out. The gameplay's still mediocre, and it's still heavily boomshot based, though, so it's still a pretty bad map. And sniping in the dark when the rifle gives off a glaring sign that you're being looked at is significantly less cool than it was in Gears 1, and it definitely takes away from the sniping aspect of it when you know you're being looked at. The map just doesn't have a whole lot going for it. It's a clusterfuck in the center. It's so boomshot based, it's ridiculous. I mean, it literally controls everything on the map. I mean, Krill is cool, I guess, which probably saved it for me, putting it down another slot or two, but because it has that unique factor to it. But it's still not a great map at all, even if they were able to fix the side imbalance that the Gears 1 version had. The remaining 3 maps are all Gears 2 maps, and man, I know I said I wouldn't get into the Gears 2 bashing, but they're pretty much the perfect examples of what in God's name was Epic thinking when they made that game. You have the good idea with infinite potential that still turned out bad in Flood, the awful idea that could have almost worked out, but Epic makes too many oversights to let it work that Gears 1 type accidental magic with Hail, and then you've just got this boring, uninspired, stalemate-ish, and just generally bad gameplay style of a map in Highway that reminds me way too much of all the boring Locust Hollow bullshit in Campaign. Let's start with Highway. It has a Brumac on it, the sides are balanced, the weapon placements are pretty good, the good ends there. The map is literally a reimagination of the main concept of canals, which doesn't work in Gears 2 because of inconsistent movement speeds, but with shittier weapons than canals, so it's also a worse version of a reimagination of canals. Remember how I just said the weapon placements were pretty good? Yeah, now imagine the most retarded, just completely retarded decisions on what weapons to put in those spots would look like. You now have Highway. It's amazing how Epic somehow doesn't learn from the mistakes they make with other maps, like River, for example, where having 2 snipers that can immediately see each other does not work when they never get to the spot at the same exact time. Oh, and while we're at it, let's put a boom shot in a small 2-foot corridor where nobody can see the players in there unless you're on the other side of that corridor. And switch it off with a Scorcher, so nobody gives a fuck about that section of the map, unless of course their brain went numb from the last round of bullshit weapons, and they thought it was boom round. And just to round it off, let's put a Mulcher and a Mortar on the map, directly across from 2 snipers, who can see their every tankish step. Yes, good decisions, Epic. Excellent weapon choices. At least for once, they put 1 set of frags on the map. God forbid if those small-ass halls had frags littered on the ground every single round. The map would be auto-horrible tier. Still, when the 2 Sniper Torque players don't get locked into constant combat, the map plays surprisingly decently. It's kind of like the opposite of Thrashball and Dry Dock. The opening minute or so is pure garbage and might just kill the whole mood of the map, but the mid-round play can be surprisingly good and tactical. It's just a matter of seeing the mid-round actually not be 2-on-5 immediately, which is pretty rare. And then we have the map that is plagued by what would seem like the same issue, but it's actually the opposite. Flood. Flood has an incredible take on side balance, awesome weapon placement, at least when you take chain frag nuking out of the equation, and it has the environmental change to actually force action, but in a slower and more constant way than Avalanche, which I prefer. And then, of course, we have the typical Gears 2 bullshit of how one bad thing messes up the whole goddamn thing. The Boomshot, Torque Bow, Hammer of Dawn, Mortar, frags are all located in the center of the map. Not just across the center of the map, the center of the map. You know, the portion with 2 choke points, and an overlook, and cover. Yet the section that is only available for about a minute and a half has pretty much nothing. This turns what could have been an awesome tactical balancing act where you have to fight for weapons in time to either be able to take control of up top or just rush to the center of the map later on. It just kills it. Followed by some chain nuking, followed by some waiting for the flood, followed by the last few players on the team getting beat, forced to rush into a full team with every weapon. More often than not, I wound up wanting to just roll into the emulsion and end it before I had to deal with that. I guess that's one redeeming quality of the map that goes beyond what I mentioned before, but it doesn't save it. And finally, we have Hail. Hail reminds me of Gears 1 in the way that a lot of the maps sound pretty bad on paper, but they find a way to work. Of course, that's what I would say if the map had balanced spawns, or if it didn't have 2 sets of frags, or if Scourge and Cantus didn't take less damage in the Hail because fuck hitboxes that make sense. Regardless, Hail suffers from the worst spawn imbalance of all time, immediately making it not allowed to be in the upper half of the map tier. Seriously, the COG team can have a set of grenades, a sniper, and a boom shot by the time the Locusts have even hit their grenade set, while the Locusts get a slightly easier road to the torque bow. And then when you flip sides just to, give both teams the advantage of working each side, the Locusts get a torque bow, and then a mulcher, and a set of nades. While the COG team gets a set of nades and a slightly easier road to the sniper. And while normally I would take the bow over the snipe on most maps, the way Hail plays out and the way the map is laid out, the sniper is just a better weapon to have all the time on that map. In other words, right off the bat, the COG team has a massive dick, and the Locusts are prying their ass cheeks open with jaws of life. It's just not fair. The Hail falling also tends to kill off any form of mid-round flow as well, making the rounds last much longer than they ever could possibly have needed to. A good environmental hazard speeds up gameplay, like the Avalanche on Avalanche, or the Flood on Flood if the map was made good. Hail just slows it down, and map control is just too easy to maintain once you get the power weapons, and those two aspects unfortunately go hand in hand with each other on this map. The one saving grace for this map is that the mansion side grenades are placed just close enough to the spawn that you can prevent an automatic boom shot pickup, but even then, you have to work pretty hard just to ensure the other team isn't getting a free boom shot. When teams are aware of this, it plays out surprisingly well considering it's such a lopsided fight off the start, but it doesn't play well enough to make the map good. If the weapons were placed in the center of the map, and the garage spawn wasn't guaranteed a power weapon, we might have a halfway decent map that plays a little slow, which there's not a problem with that. Slow gameplay can work. Instead, we just have a bunch of nonsensical bullshit that, like River, finds a way to be slightly playable in spite of all of the bullshit most of the time, and in fact, sometimes the bullshit is the only thing keeping it playable. Well, that's it for this tier. I feel like the common theme to this tier was either spawn imbalance causing automatic power weapons and map control, which causes stalemate gameplay, or power weapons and map control going hand in hand with each other too much, making teamwork pretty much pointless and a non-factor because it's just a given at that point. Most of these maps were definitely fixable. It's just a little more complicated than adding a choke point in most of their cases. Bad weapon placement was definitely a common theme as well, which sucks due to how easy that is to fix. A lot of the maps could have just been made twice as good with a different weapon layout. It was that simple for some of them, like Flood. I don't know how Epic dropped the ball on those maps that badly and never went back to fix them, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Nice! Watch it! Oh yeah! Shit! Come back here! Face.
Thanks to you, humanity survives yet another day.